You have to let go of control in order to facilitate a great design sprint. Hey, this is Clay Richardson, Chief Accelerator with Digital FastForward. And today, what I want to share with you is a challenge that I've seen many innovation leaders run into. And I ran into this a couple times over the last couple of weeks where I was working with an innovation leader to help plan out a design sprint. And for some of you that are familiar with design thinking, you know a design sprint brings together design thinking, lean startup, and agile development into a very compressed cycle of 3 days, usually it's 3 days, where you're able to ideate very rapidly and build out prototypes very rapidly to really validate ideas before you invest heavily into them, invest a lot of money into them. And a lot of times a design sprint actually de-risks your projects, right? And so doing a little quick design sprint, 3 days, sometimes it can go over 2 weeks, is the best way to make sure that you're not going to be spending money on ideas that nobody even wants or that aren't going to get used. And so this is an activity that really every innovation leader, digital transformation leader, and I would say anyone in IT or in business should know how to do, running a design sprint. But as I was saying, I was working with a couple leaders recently on planning their design sprints. And one of the things that I saw in both of these planning sessions is leaders really focused on trying to frame the challenge at the beginning to get to a certain outcome, right? And when you look at design sprints, the first part when you're doing your planning is all about preparation and figuring out what's the right challenge to focus on. And so when you're doing that, you're trying to figure out what's the best problem, the biggest problem that a design sprint can help you solve, right? And so you may have one big problem, but you start to, at the beginning, explore the problem space, right? So you don't just think about that one big problem. You start to dig in and say, well, maybe if we look at the problem from this way, we'll be able to run a design sprint where we're gonna learn, right? And that's the key piece there. This one leader that I was working with, where she was looking at the challenge and she was starting to make the challenge so broad because she wanted to come up with a lot of ideas. So instead of it being a very focused, tight challenge, where maybe in her case, we wanted to look at how do we improve the internal operations process around onboarding a new customer, right? And so one piece we wanted to zero in on is customer frustration around having to send papers back and forth, right? Meaning having to sign things, send it back, even with digital. That was one piece that we thought would be good to look at. But what this innovation leader ended up doing is trying to make it so broad, looking at the entire customer onboarding journey and trying to transform that. And she wanted to do that because she felt like she would get a lot of ideas, right? Like the brainstorming, if the problem was broad, when we go through the design sprint, she felt like, hey, we can get hundreds, maybe thousands of ideas on how to improve, right? And that can be a challenge, trying to have a lot of ideas, but I see teams do this a lot. I do this sometimes if I'm not aware, that I'll try to make the problem statement or the challenge so broad because I know it's going to get a lot of ideas, right? And that was one extreme that I saw with one leader I was working with. Another leader that I worked with was focused on the opposite challenge, right? Or the opposite end of the spectrum, where this business leader, he was looking at it from the lens of, let me frame the challenge so that I actually get the solution that I already have in mind, right? And that is also a common mistake that I see with leaders doing this, is they already have thought of an idea, already have a solution. Now they want to run a design sprint to be able to validate that solution. And the challenge with that is you don't create enough space for to actually innovate, right? That becomes the challenge in that scenario, is you don't create enough space to be able to ideate and come up with new ideas, right? And so you have to kind of navigate these two. You don't want to be so broad with the challenge that you don't really focus enough on ideas that can be executable. And then the other side is you don't want to be so narrow that you end up stifling true innovation, right? And so this is where and definitely before I kind of walk through like how do you overcome this, but I just want to say it's understandable, right? A lot of times if we look underneath what's going on with us as innovation leaders when we're trying to do this planning and beginning to facilitate design sprint, is we want to make sure it's a great experience for people. We want to make sure that when people come, they really have a good time, and that at the end they say we got to a great outcome. And unfortunately, that need to essentially control the outcome, undermines us, right? And so what we have to start thinking about is how do we still make sure this is a great experience without feeling the need to be in full control, right? And that's the big part, the kind of uncomfortableness. And this is where a facilitator that mentored me really helped. And you might have heard me give him a shout out, Adam Billings at Treehouse Design. And Adam was a mentor for me. And one of the things that I always appreciated when I was learning design thinking and design sprints, going back, I would say, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, is what I appreciated that Adam did is he created space for discomfort, right? Instead of answering questions, instead of over prescribing or making a challenge too narrow or making it too broad, he basically allowed me, and I saw him do this with others, allowed people to just ideate on the challenge. And so going in different directions and knowing as a facilitator, his role was not to control the outcome, but to really help explore the problem space, right? And that's what he helped me work through, and something I rely on a regular basis. And so when you're starting to do this, I give you a couple of tips in terms of how to make sure as a facilitator planning a design sprint that you're not over focused on the outcome and over focused on controlling the outcome, right? And so the first step is to really just ask, what are the big problems around this particular area that you're thinking about for the design sprint, right? And just give you an example, one of the design sprint that I facilitated a few years back was with Best Buy. And Best Buy shared one of the problems or challenges that they were having was just around how to improve order management, right? And some of the back-end processes around order management. And what we ended up doing, instead of just saying, hey, let's just frame the challenge around how might we improve order management, we actually spent time brainstorming on 20 to 25 different problem statements. So really looking at that order management space and saying, okay, let's just brainstorm around these, right? And so we were able to brainstorm and come up with a list. So using stickies, really nice stickies, and you can do this virtually now too, but brainstorming around the problem space. And then the second tip, and I do this now with any team, and I recommend any leader do this. The second tip is to actually allow the sponsors and stakeholders to vote on which problem statements, which challenges most resonate with them. And we did this recently with Blue Cross Blue Shield that we worked with, where we actually had them identify all of the challenges. So I think we started off with something like 15 challenges, and then we had their leadership actually prioritize which challenges were most critical, which ones didn't seem like it would have as much of an impact. And that was a great exercise from two perspectives. First perspective is it got buy-in on this challenge by the leadership or from the leadership. You always, when you're focused on a challenge, you want to make sure your leadership or whoever the executive sponsor is really bought into focusing on this challenge. So that was the first thing we were able to do, is get that buy-in. The second thing we were able to do around that, by doing that, was to see, well, which ones were the most important, so that we could see, was there opportunities to combine challenges or explore challenges from different angles. And so it just helped create a really nice springboard for jumping off into the design sprint. And one thing to keep in mind, and I think a lot of teams, this is a pro tip, I guess they say, from the improvement shows, but a pro tip here is, when you start ideating around the problem space and you come up with all of these challenges and problem statements, what's really cool is you now have a funnel of challenges to work off of for the future, right? The whole idea isn't just, hey, we're gonna choose one challenge and that's gonna be it. Sometimes teams that I've worked with will actually look at the list of challenges and we'll choose the top 3, and then we'll break off into 3 different teams. Each team focuses on a different challenge, and that just game change, because you're now starting to look at the challenge from different angles, different teams coming up with different ideas. So that's another, just something to think about as you're doing your planning for your design sprints. And so what I want to leave you with and have you really embrace is this idea and belief that letting go of control as a facilitator is your new superpower, right? Is at the beginning, letting go of control, working with your project sponsors, your executive sponsors, your stakeholders, letting them explore the problem space. But even when you're facilitating, that is a superpower, letting go of control and allowing people to be uncomfortable. That's the whole idea of a design sprint, is it's not supposed to be you give all the answers as the facilitator. Your job is to make sure that the team is learning and exploring the problem space. That should be your new metric for how well you're doing as a facilitator. How well are people learning as they go through a design sprint or a design thinking session that you're leading? And then at the end, when teams are coming up with their prototypes, you also want to be okay with letting go of control. And this is the area I get tripped up sometimes, because I love the ideas and I'm like, whoa, if you do your prototype like this, it would be great. The key here is at the end, and really I would say from the beginning to the end, you want every person that's a part of the design sprint to feel a sense of ownership over the final solution, over the problem, over the ideation. And so the more you as a facilitator are steering and giving all the answers and helping build a prototype, the less sense of ownership that they're gonna have at the end, and it's gonna be your baby, right? And that's not success, right? And so that's what I want to leave you with, is this belief that letting go of control as a facilitator is your superpower. And so what I'm also going to do is we're going to share out our design sprint facilitators guide, and it's really innovation sprint facilitators guide. That's what we refer to when we do design sprints, is this an innovation sprint, because usually it's based on technology transformation or some digital transformation. So we do it a little bit differently, but it's referred to as an innovation sprint. And we're going to give you the link to our innovation sprint facilitators guide. And that has a lot of tips, tricks, how do you get ready, when to run a design sprint or an innovation sprint, when not to run it, what roles are needed, who should be there, all of that, how to get prepared. So definitely make sure you download that. And then also make sure you take time to schedule a strategy call with us. And so this is where we go deep with you. It's 1 hour, it's a complimentary call where we go deep on a specific innovation challenge that you're having in your business, in your organization. And so we're gonna include the link in this post. We're gonna include the link for you to schedule time for your complimentary strategy call. And so with that, this is Clay, really great to connect, and just looking forward to sharing more, but also hearing from you. Definitely take time to email us anything you're seeing, people who you think are interesting. articles, anything, right? Or if you just have a question, just email us. And so with that, this is Clay signing off, and happy innovating. You have to let go of control in order to facilitate a great design sprint.